Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic of this webinar is the New England Solar Cost Reduction Partnership, Results and Lessons Learned. We have two hosts for this webinar. We have with us Warren Leon, who is the Executive Director of the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA, and we also have Nate Hausman, who is a Project Director here at CESA. This webinar is a presentation of CESA as well as the U.S. Department of Energy's Sunshot Initiative. And before I pass it over to Nate and Warren for our presentation, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our participants are in this webinar are in listen-only mode, so you have two options to join the audio portion of this webinar. You can either call in using a telephone or you can connect using a computer, mic, and speakers. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on your webinar console and hitting send. We will be reading through your questions throughout the webinar, and we will answer as many as we can as time allows. At the end of our webinar, we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A following all of the presentations. So again, please type your questions in as you think of them and don't wait until the end to submit your questions. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. You will find a recording of this webinar as well as all of our previous CESA webinars on our website at cesa.org/webinars. And we will also send you an email following the webinar within about 24 hours with a link to the webinar recording and the slides. And with that, I would like to pass it over to CESA's Executive Director, Warren Leon.
Hey, thank you very much, Samantha. You know, CESA is a national nonprofit organization, and we work to implement smart clean energy policies and programs primarily at the state level. At the core of our organization is a national network of public agencies that work to advance clean energy. And as you can see in the next slide, we have members in a large number of states across the country, and our list of members is growing. This project you're going to hear about today involved members from 5 of our states, all the New England states with the exception of Maine, and it was a great project to watch and see how the states work together so closely and how much progress they were able to make over the last 3 years. I'm going to turn things over to Nate Hausman, who did the day-to-day management of this important initiative, and he will tell you something about it. And then we're going to have representatives of each of the states speak briefly on some aspect of their work. So Nate, it's all yours.
Great, thanks, Warren. So yeah, what is the New England Solar Cost Reduction Partnership? Well, we're a coalition of 5 New England states. That's Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont, and of course with support from CESA. In 2013, we applied for funding from the U.S. Department of Energy to work to drive down solar soft costs, and it's through the U.S. Department of Energy Sunshot Initiative Rooftop Solar Challenge 2. So in September 2013, we were awarded funding and commenced work. So on the left part of this screen, you can see some of the state partners we worked closely with. In Connecticut, that's the Connecticut Green Bank. In Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. New Hampshire, it's New Hampshire Office of Energy and Planning, Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, and Rhode Island Commerce Corporation, or Commerce RI, and the Vermont Public Service Department. Great, so just a little background on Rooftop Solar Challenge 2. It's a funding opportunity. As I noted, the New England Solar Cost Reduction Partnership, we were awarded money through this program. It's part of the U.S. Department of Energy's Sunshot Initiative. Sunshot Initiative, it's a collaborative national effort to make solar energy cost competitive with traditional sources of energy by 2020. Through Sunshot, the Department of Energy supports efforts by private companies, universities, nonprofits, and national labs to drive down the cost of solar electricity to make it cost competitive. So Rooftop, the way Rooftop Solar Challenge 2 was structured, it incentivized regional teams like our effort in New England to try and make solar easier and more affordable for Americans, to reduce soft or quote-unquote plug-in costs by streamlining permit processes, updating planning and zoning codes, improving standards for connecting solar power to the grid, and increasing access to financing. And we'll touch on each of those topic areas briefly. So the focus of today's presentation is really an overview of a report on accomplishments and lessons learned that we produced. Our project wrapped up recently in September 2016, and as part of it we sort of compiled some of the learnings, some of what we did into this report. It's available for download for free on the CESA website, and you can see you can find a bit.ly link to it, or you can go to www.cesa.org and work from there and find it there through our resource library. Great. So you know, our broad objectives for driving down soft costs included increasing coordination among the participating states and key stakeholders. We thought refining and deploying successful tools and practices from Rooftop Solar Challenge 1. Connecticut and Massachusetts were both recipients of Rooftop Solar Challenge 1 awards, and they had some lessons learned from that. That's the predecessor award to Rooftop Solar Challenge 2. Implementing best practices, and really because New England is relatively small region and installers often work across state lines, we particularly focused on trying to achieve more congruent and consistent policies and practices across state lines. And many of the outputs, as you'll see today, we think were useful beyond New England, so we really sought to communicate, like we're doing through this webinar, some of our lessons learned and best practices beyond the New England region. Okay, so a few of the activity areas that we were active in, you can see the list here, and I'll just share with you a little bit about how each one sort of touched on soft cost reductions piece. So the first, community shared solar, or community solar, as it sometimes goes by. Because community shared solar can be sized to create cost efficiencies and is accessible to electric customers who are renters, who don't have adequate access to solar access on their homes, we think this community solar presents a tool for taking advantage of economies of scale, and ultimately for reducing customer acquisition costs. So that was an area we were active in. Consumer education, providing consumers with sound information about PV helps to ensure a robust, competitive, fair marketplace for solar over the long term. E-permitting, or electronic permitting, or online permitting, you might hear it referred to. The notion is transitioning to online solar permitting can increase permitting efficiency and transparency, saving time and money for municipal building departments, for solar contractors, for consumers. Financing. So, you know, it should come as no surprise that many solar customers need long-term, low-cost financing to make installing solar affordable, and there's lots of solar-friendly financing solutions can help reduce the financial barriers to, you know, those upfront, what can be steep upfront installation costs. Fire safety, you know, solar presents some special considerations for firefighters. If firefighters understand how to deal with fires on buildings that have PV, municipalities will be more likely to respond to support and encourage PV development and deployment. Licensing, this is really a Rhode Island specific instance in our case, developing and clearly delineating smart credentialing requirements for solar installers reduces electrical licensing barriers, while at the same time ensures that solar installers possess the qualifications to provide competent installation services. Interconnection, the process of getting approval to connect to the grid. That can be a long and process at times. Working with utilities, each of the states worked with utilities on steps to improve that process and help expedite that process. Permitting, this was an area we were particularly active in. Difficult, costly, time-consuming permitting processes present a barrier for solar deployment. Providing guidance and other advisory support to municipal building departments and municipalities overall can help simplify and streamline residential solar PV permitting processes. Solar contractor training, making sure that contractors are trained up on ways to improve their own internal processes can help drive down those overhead costs, and facilitating more communication generally between program administrators at the state and the solar industry can help smooth programmatic implementation. Solar scorecards, this is an area that Connecticut worked in, just using carrots to encourage municipalities to take actions to become more solar friendly. The Connecticut Green Bank was able to create a statewide scoring system for municipalities. Solarize, I won't touch too much on this, just to say that because we'll have some follow-up later on it, but that it's a group purchasing program for solar systems. It can help lower acquisition costs. The basic notion is that as more homeowners join to join the purchasing program, their costs go down through tiered pricing and with reduced prices for more participation. Structural review. In some jurisdictions, a full professional engineer's review is required for solar installations. Developing guidance for small residential installations can limit the instances where a full professional engineer's review is required. And zoning, streamlining, and providing greater efficiency with zoning can help reduce installation barriers and reduce the time and cost for projects overall. So that's just an overview of the areas we were active in, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we did in each area, and then I'll turn it over to the states to focus on, to really highlight particular areas that they were engaged in. So community solar, community shared solar, this is, as I noted, this is just sort of the high notes. We did a lot of other things in addition to this, but I just wanted to flag a few things. Massachusetts published a solar guide for condominium owners and associations. It discusses legal aspects of condominiums, explains how a solar project fits into an association's decision-making process, and provides information about the ownership models for PV projects at condominiums. Vermont offered a community solar loan program. I won't talk about this in detail because we'll touch on it later in today's webinar. And then I'd just also note that CESA, with some input from folks in Massachusetts and Vermont, we arranged for the submission of a private letter ruling request to the IRS, and the notion was to sort of gain, there was not a lot of clarity on the circumstances in which community solar, particular panel owners in a community solar array were eligible for the investment tax credit, for the residential investment tax credit. That's a 30% tax credit. So we worked with various stakeholders to arrange for a private letter ruling, and in 2015 the IRS issued a favorable private letter ruling that we think may have some implications for community solar projects more widely. Consumer education, I'll just note that the Connecticut Green Bank overhauled a website, the Go Solar Connecticut website, lots of great information on there. As part of that, they also produced a consumer-focused video that helps folks walk through the installation process. New Hampshire worked with the Lakes Region Community College to do a series of introductory PV trainings for residents. They also did one for municipal officials. Vermont recently published a Vermonter's Guide to Residential Solar. And then CESA published a guide, a homeowner's guide to solar financing, really focusing on leases, loans, and PPAs to help help folks navigate the residential PV financing landscape. We also produced a version of that in Spanish, so there's a Spanish version, and various states have produced state-specific versions of that guide as well, including Massachusetts, New Mexico, and New York. It also, informed the Vermont Guide to Residential Solar that I just noted too. Electronic permitting. So I won't talk too much about this because this is another area that we'll hear about a little bit later. The Connecticut Green Bank and the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources both worked with municipalities in their state to adopt online permitting. Both made progress, but I will note that it proved to be a difficult area for a few different reasons: project limitations, cost, integration challenges. So we also explored other permitting solutions, including remote submission of solar permit applications via email and portals, and I can talk a little bit more about some of the challenges and some of the solutions later on in the lessons learned portion. I'll also say, just flag that Rhode Island did a lot of work in this department, working with municipalities, and the partnership supported Rhode Island's transition to online permitting in a number of those municipalities, and there's a larger sort of statewide, at the state level, an effort with the Fire Marshal's Office and the Building Code Commission Office. And Sean will talk about that later. Financing, even though this slide is relatively terse, there's a lot of work that happened in this department. Connecticut Green Bank continued its work on financing products and training installers on those products. Massachusetts developed the Massachusetts Solar Loan Program, which connects potential solar customers with low-interest financing. And I just note that over 960 loans have been completed under that program, over $32 million loaned. And then I already flagged it, but Vermont offered a community solar loan program as well. Fire safety. So Connecticut partnered with their fire academy, developed a training for firefighters there. Hearing about the success of that training, the partnership did a regional effort, conducted a series of 7 PV trainings across the other 4 states, and as part of that, relied on a a fire safety training module. So those trainings were 3 hours, and that module, those slides that was used for that training, is available on the CESA website. Installer licensing. Rhode Island implemented a statewide licensing program designed to remove electrical licensing barriers for installers. The Commerce RI and the Office of Energy Resources created licensing resources as well for new installers in the state. Interconnection. Each participating state worked with its utilities to identify specific steps they could take to help improve interconnection processes. You can see some of them here. Connecticut worked with Connecticut Light and Power, now part of Eversource, and United Illuminating, to propose revisions to Connecticut's distributed generation interconnection guidelines. Massachusetts worked with National Grid and Northeast Utilities on participating in the Massachusetts Distributed Generation Working Group. That ended up offering recommendations to amend the uniform standards for interconnecting distributed generation to help ease some of those interconnection challenges. New Hampshire developed this, as you can see, this online simplified guide to utility interconnection requirements. Rhode Island's electric utility, National Grid, held some trainings on its interconnection tariff at Commerce RI, and Vermont successfully worked with GMP, Green Mountain Power, to eliminate the homeowner insurance requirements from its net metering rules. And actually, the new version of Vermont's net metering rule will eliminate the utility accessible external disconnect requirement as well. Permitting, another area we were really active in. Connecticut released a comprehensive guide that includes a bunch of permitting guidance under our grant. Massachusetts held a bunch of trainings and published a series of case studies highlighting municipalities that have really taken the lead in streamlining their solar permitting process to help encourage other municipalities to take action. And they produced a series of webinars on permitting and PV safety. New Hampshire published a version. Again, this was an area that New Hampshire was able to build off of some of the work that Connecticut and Massachusetts did to publish its own version, its own rooftop residential solar PV permitting, zoning, and interconnection guide. Rhode Island conducted trainings for building and electrical officials, and Vermont has a statewide permitting process, except for the city of Burlington. So Vermont worked with the city of Burlington to identify some ways to streamline Burlington's PV permitting process, residential PV permitting process. Okay. Solar contractor training, I'll just say that Rhode Island held some regular meetings with contractors, again, to just communication to facilitate that. Vermont worked with a consultant to deliver trainings on solar and efficiency that combine PV with efficiency upgrades to try and maximize those energy investments. Solar scorecards. Connecticut worked with Yale to create scorecards for municipalities. It scores them on a range of different things, but the notion is to encourage those municipalities to take action. Solarize, and I already really touched on this, and we'll hear more about it, but I'll just note that Connecticut and Massachusetts, they had established Solarize programs under the first round of Rooftop Solar Challenge, Rooftop Solar Challenge 1. Those programs continued very successfully under Rooftop Solar Challenge 2, and then Rhode Island also launched its own successful Solarize program under Rooftop Solar Challenge 2, and CESA published a guide, about implementing Solarize programs for state program managers. Structural review, Connecticut, well, really, Massachusetts was the first under Rooftop Solar Challenge 1 that created this prescriptive process for structural approval of small solar systems. Really, again, using some of the lessons learned as part of that process, Connecticut developed its own structural review worksheet, and New Hampshire did the same thing. And both of those are embedded in their permitting guides. Zoning, Connecticut included, as part of its permitting guide, included some zoning, a model zoning ordinance. Massachusetts developed a bylaw and policy guidance as well, and New Hampshire included some model zoning considerations in its guide too. Okay, so that's just a brief overview of some of the project areas, the activity areas we were engaged in. I just note that, so at the beginning of the project, we collected some data from states and did a little bit of baselining, and to the extent we could, obviously there was we had to clean up some of the data to some extent, just because the data wasn't exactly apples to apples in some cases. So we tried to make them as analogous as we could. Using those methods, we were able to show that Connecticut, Massachusetts, not so much, New Hampshire actually, was more of a flat line, but Rhode Island and Vermont seemed to show median installed cost declining over the project period. Vermont actually no longer collects that kind of information on the residential level, but through the project, there was a solar cost study that suggested that costs have declined in Vermont as well. And I should say that those cost lines that we derived are also consistent with state-by-state data that LBNL, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, in its Tracking the Sun report, shows similar cost reductions over the 5-state New England region we worked in, declining as well. So, from close to $5 a watt in 2012 to $4 a watt or roughly there in 2015. So we did learn a lot through this project, and there's some key lessons, and I'm just going to touch on them briefly, but I think really the states can be the ones that can emphasize some of these lessons learned. That there was, I'll just note, there was tremendous value in collaborating and sharing resources among states, both leveraging efforts, building off efforts already done. We were able to achieve some cost efficiencies and really help move things along. So we had regular communications with among state partners and a listserv, and we're really able to leverage some of those efforts. In addition to some of the outputs that I just talked about, one of the key points that came up time and time again was just that, especially in the soft cost realm, in the solar soft cost realm, working with real people, with real building departments, engaging stakeholders, building those relationships is the key to a lot of those soft cost reductions. So that's a lesson that sort of cropped up over and over again, that you can produce lots and lots of outputs, but really ultimately soft costs, is about building relationships, building trust, and working with people to implement a lot of that guidance, and working with municipalities in particular. State-driven work can stimulate independent efforts. A key place that we noted this is in the Solarize realm, where state-driven efforts started as state-driven efforts, have now moved to private efforts. For example, Connecticut has transitioned its program, so it's now entirely run through a nonprofit and doesn't have state funding. Its Solarize program, that we saw Solarize programs crop up in New Hampshire and the Upper Valley region of Vermont, and so some of our work, I think, has stimulated independent efforts and moved to the private sector. Solarize continues to be a successful cost reduction strategy. Again, I won't touch on this too much, but we, consistently saw Solarize produces, significant cost reductions. Not all successful strategies can cross state lines. So some strategies, some things that work in some states because of the regulatory environment there, can't work in other states. For example, I noted that Vermont has a statewide solar permitting scheme. Well, and Vermont has a particularly streamlined process as a result. Some of the ways that operates isn't really transferable to other states. Municipal authority can make statewide change complicated, hard. A lot of the permitting efforts, for example, in most of these states, does happen at the municipal level, not at the statewide level, and so making statewide change and inducing municipalities to streamline their permitting can be challenging. And then I mentioned before that online permitting, we had lofty ambitions about implementing it, and still think it's a really important and viable step forward, but it ended up being difficult to achieve because of some of those challenges, both platform challenging, integration challenges that we noted. So we sort of had to change strategies. And then I'll also just say that new opportunities and needs emerged. PV, fire safety, for instance, wasn't an area we were particularly engaged in at the outset of our project, but proved to be an important area for us. Okay, well, I think that's a wrap for me. I want to turn it over to some of our state speakers to really talk about particular programs, a program from each of the participating states and activity areas they were engaged in. So what I'm going to do is I'll tee this up for them. I'll read through each of our guest speakers' bio: Elizabeth Hazelwood, Elizabeth Youngblood, Rick Menard, Sean Selleck, and Andy Perchlik, and then I'll let them go. So I'll cover bios at the outset here. So Elizabeth Youngblood is a Senior Associate of Statutory and Infrastructure Programs at the Connecticut Green Bank. Isabel's expertise lies in developing and implementing programs that address regulatory barriers to solar deployment at the state and local level. Prior to joining the Green Bank bank, Isabel worked at several nonprofit organizations focused on community and economic development in New York City. She holds an MS in urban planning from Columbia University and a BA from the University of Michigan. Elizabeth Youngblood is a senior project manager at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, or MassCEC for short. Elizabeth is responsible for driving consumer education and adoption programs at MassCEC, including the Solarize Massachusetts and Mass Solar Connect programs, and has been advancing solar PV projects for public, commercial, and residential customers since 2009. Elizabeth holds a BA in International Relations from Mount Holyoke College and a Master's of Environmental Management from the Harvard Extension School. Rick Menard has been the Deputy Director of the New Hampshire Office of Energy and Planning since January 2015. His career has focused on public administration and the environment. He previously served as the Executive Director of the Harvard University Center for the Environment, President of the New Hampshire Audubon, and Vice President of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. Sean Selleck is a project manager for the Rhode Island Office of Digital Excellence. Immediately prior to this, he served as the city of Providence as a civic innovation consultant, having spent the bulk of his career with various management consultancies. Sean has degrees in engineering and public policy from North Carolina State University and Duke University, respectively. Andy Perchlik, since 2009, Andy Perchlik has been the fund manager of the Vermont Clean Energy Development Fund, located within the Public Service Department, the State Energy Office. Prior to working at the Clean Energy Development Fund, Andy was the founder and executive director of Renewable Energy Vermont, a Vermont trade association representing all renewable energy technologies. So that's the lineup of state speakers we got. And with that, I'll turn it over to Isabel Hazelwood to talk about some of Connecticut Green Bank's financing work under Rooftop Solar Challenge 2.
Great, thank you, Nate. Just quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Connecticut Green Bank, we're a quasi-public state agency that was established in 2011 to bring programs that leverage private capital and create long-term sustainable financing for energy efficiency and clean energy projects in Connecticut. So in the residential space, since 2011, we've reduced our incentives by 80%, seen cost reductions in solar PV of about 35%, and increased our residential solar deployment by 2,700%. So we've seen huge growth in the residential space in Connecticut, and I think a large part of that is due to our financing. So back in 2013, when Rooftop Solar Challenge 2 was getting started, we were really focused on bringing more financial products into the residential solar space to help independent contractors gain access to low-cost, affordable financing, and also educate them on how to use financing to sell solar. We also found that this really enhanced the value proposition for customers because they were able to be cash flow positive very quickly with their investments. So we came up with 3 different financial products for residential solar PV. We have a CT Solar Lease, a CT Solar Loan, which is a solar-specific product, and then a Smart E-Loan, which finances both energy efficiency and clean energy measures. And we established all of these products through public-private partnerships and co-investments. Overall, the programs were very successful. We were able to deploy $62 million worth of capital across more than 2,000 solar PV installations. And we also experienced a very strong portfolio of credit quality. So across over those 2,000 projects, we only experienced 6 delinquencies and 3 defaults. So it really helped all of our independent contractors in Connecticut really start to understand financing and how they can use financing to grow their businesses and increase solar deployment across the state of Connecticut. And I think it's also a really great example of market transformation because both the CT Solar Loan and CT Solar Lease were fully transitioned into the private market, and they're no longer programs that the Green Bank administers anymore. The only continuing program that we have out of these initial 3 is the Smart E-Loan. So more recently, the Green Bank has kind of turned its focus in terms of financing in the residential space towards low and moderate income households, as well as solar plus energy efficiency. We found that there was really no need for us to be playing in that loan and lease space anymore, since the private market was able to kind of step in and take over. But now there is a need for us to kind of kickstart solar in these new markets as well. So for LMI solar, one of the biggest challenges that we see is that for these types of customers, the energy burden is much higher for them than it is for upper income band households. And it really requires innovative financing and incentives to bring their energy burden in line with those higher income households. So when we're looking at a low income household, if they just do solar, they're able to bring that high energy burden down to a moderate level. But when we pair the solar with energy efficiency, we're really able to capitalize on those savings and bring that down to a reasonable level. We've also found in the low-income space that ownership may not be the best model. A lot of low-income households don't necessarily have the tax burden to fully capitalize on the benefits of the ITC. So leases do work better for that market segment, but oftentimes with market rate leases, the homeowners may not qualify for a traditional lease credit requirement. So back in 2015, we released an RFP for partners, solar partners, to help us address this new market segment. And we formed a partnership with Posigen, who has a very innovative model where they're pairing solar leases with energy efficiency. And their customers are allowed to opt in for an additional $10 a month payment for an energy savings agreement. And that agreement finances $2,400 worth of energy efficiency improvements over the 20-year term of the lease. And we found that to be a very effective model for low-income households because they're able to spread the cost of their investment over the entire term of the lease, but then immediately reap the benefits of the energy savings when they pair solar with energy efficiency. So far, Posigen has installed 350 solar projects in Connecticut, and they have an additional 240 in the pipeline. Of those projects, 74% are low-income households, and we've also found that 86% of their customers are opting in for the energy savings agreement, which is a really good sign for us. It's showing that there is a strong appetite for solar plus energy efficiency in the Connecticut market, and it's something that we want to continue to kind of push forward. So we're also focused on solar plus energy efficiency in an ownership model through our Smarty loan product. We've established a kind of Smarty bundle package where homeowners can install solar and undertake energy efficiency measures, and when they bundle the two of those, they're eligible for a lower interest rate of 2.99%. So there, through financing, we're creating an incentive for these homeowners to take on both initiatives and also create deeper energy savings for them as well. And then in terms of our overall marketplace development, this has also been a huge opportunity for the Connecticut Green Bank to facilitate even more partnerships between independent solar contractors and energy efficiency companies so that they can partner together to offer these types of solutions to the Connecticut marketplace and expand their business and take advantage of new opportunities and revenue streams. So we're continuing to explore both of these new markets in Connecticut and build off the successes of our early financial products. And I think that in Connecticut, at least, the financing has been really key. It's really helped us crack open the solar market in Connecticut and make this technology accessible to many more homeowners and income brackets than we would have been able to do with just traditional cash purchases. So that's our financial products in a nutshell at the Connecticut Green Bank. I'm happy to take any more questions during the Q&A, but I'll leave it at that and pass it on to Elizabeth.
All right, thank you so much. This is Elizabeth Youngblood from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. I'm going to be talking about the Solarize Mass program. Mass CEC is a quasi-state agency. We're focused on growing the clean energy economy in Massachusetts, and we were a partner with the Department of Energy Resources as part of Rooftop Solar Challenge 1 or 2. DOER also drove many of the other initiatives for this program, including installer and inspector trainings and a number of other resources that are found online. Mass CEC, we oversee the Solarize Mass program in partnership with the Department of Energy Resources Green Communities Division. And as part of Rooftop Solar Challenge, we offered in-kind services for Solarize Mass during the course of the program. Oh, and I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so over the past number of years, we have administered 6 rounds of the Solarize Mass program. We piloted in 2011, and we saw fairly positive results. To date, we've seen 63 communities participate in the program, leading to 2,700 contracts signed and over 17 megawatts of contracted capacity. Similar to what we've seen as a bit of a neighborhood effect, we've seen that when communities participate in Solarize Mass, oftentimes neighboring communities will become very interested and will opt to sign up for the program in the next round. The goals of Solarize Mass are to increase education and outreach. It's very focused education and outreach within a particular community. The model is meant to simplify the process of going solar for homeowners. It reduces installation costs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, about the percent savings compared to the industry average. Reduce time to contract. Homeowners can take, on average, anywhere from 1 to 5 years to decide to go solar and go through the entire process, and Solarize Mass often happens in a very shortened time frame, about 6 months, and increase adoption. We'll see a slide later on of the percent increase in communities. So looking to the right here, this is an overview of where the cost savings is found with Solarize Mass. It is a community education and outreach program coupled with a group purchasing model, so that as more people sign up, everyone receives a lower price. So to the left here is a traditional cost stack for going solar. You have installation costs, sales, customer marketing acquisition, soft costs associated with permitting and interconnection, and any sort of rebates, and then equipment costs. Solarize Mass crunches that cost stack. Installation costs would be reduced because an installer is doing a lot of work in a particular town. They can jump from project to project. If they need to do an inspection somewhere, they can jump off for a few minutes and then come back. Really where the savings are for this type of program is in the customer acquisition costs. The community is getting a lot of information out there to members and driving them to participate in the program. Installers will receive hundreds of leads from the community of interested customers, and so they can take that savings and put it into reduced costs under the program. Soft costs can also be reduced. The installer will become very familiar with the permitting processes in that town, and equipment costs, the installer may be able to purchase in bulk under the program instead of being required to kind of buy one-off equipment. A little bit about the different partners in this. As I mentioned, Mass CEC and DOE are partnered under this program. We will put out an RFP to select communities. We engage technical consultants to assist the communities in selecting installers. We provide a marketing grant and education. We'll do Solar 101 presentations, and we will also offer incentives that are open across the state. The community is really the kind of key stakeholder in this program. We've actually transitioned from driving the installer selection process to moving that to the communities driving that process with the assistance of a technical consultant. They also have a lead volunteer, we call it the solar coach, as well as a volunteer team that works with the municipality to do different outreach measures in the town. And that is really critical to getting people aware of the program. The installer is the technical expert. They will be competitively selected through an RFP or request for proposals process. They will offer free site assessments. They will offer pricing models, either a tiered pricing model or a base pricing model, depending on what the community wants. They will contract with the homeowner and will offer a turnkey contract, and then they will install the system. The homeowner is the kind of fourth participant. Their role really is to sign up under the program and then talk to their neighbors. So just going over the results, as I mentioned in 2011, we piloted the program in 4 communities and have actually done this program, as I said, 6 times. We don't have 2016 up there yet because it's still ongoing. During Rooftop Solar Challenge 1 and 2, that started at the very tail end of closing out of 2012, went a little bit into 2013, 2014, and 2015. And what we've seen over time under the program is learning lessons from previous rounds. We've also engaged with Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York in later rounds to really figure out best practices. And what we've seen over time is that the average number of contracts has gone up. There's a little bit of a downtick this last round, but and also the contracted capacity per community has gone up over time. So this is looking at adoption levels in the communities. So the red part of the bar is pre-Solarize mass, the number of small-scale residential systems that were installed prior to the round of the program. And the blue is the number of contracts that were signed during Solarize mass. So you see that in 43 of the 51 communities, they doubled the amount of small-scale solar that was in the community. You'll see here that, in some communities where there's a higher red bar at the start and onset, there is a higher number of contracts signed. We find this very interesting. We have a few theories about it. It could be that there is a pretty strong neighbor effect. If someone in your neighborhood has gone solar, you have a stronger possibility of wanting to go solar. It could be that your community has fewer trees, or they have more south-facing homes, or there may be some reasons for that. But that's just something that we've noticed, is that communities that have higher adoption rates prior to Solarize will lead to potentially higher contracting rates. For the last 4 rounds of the program, we've seen anywhere from about 18 to 20% average cost savings compared to the industry pricing. So the customers are generally receiving a good value proposition. Something that we're really interested here at the Mass CEC is understanding kind of where our in-kind costs are affecting this type of a program. They may be seeing 20% savings, but what percentage of that is due to Mass CEC efforts? So we have looked at our kind of costs with, our time and services, labor, and buying marketing materials and things like that. And what we found is for the anywhere from 85 cents to $1 per watt savings that customers find, we are buying that down by about 3 to 6 cents. So we find that there's a lot of leverage in this program, and that there's a lot of benefit in having volunteers do the outreach on the behalf of the community. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of lessons learned and results. Wanted to throw this out here. This is from a survey that we've done during different rounds of the program, looking at what are some effective outreach methods. And one of our big lessons learned over time is that communities, every community is different. Their volunteer team is different. Their outreach program is very different, the way they want to run things, but that there are certain things that different marketing methods that are very effective, and that is actually very localized. Looking at, and the question that was asked here is, what marketing method led to you to sign up and participate in the Solarize Mass program? And the ones that we see are the highest are neighbor and friend, local community or civic group, the solar coach or town official, solar installer, and then community meetings or events. Some of the things that were less effective: lawn signs, mailers, online media, and then social media was actually the lowest. A few other things, when we started this program, we really kind of took a more strict command and control approach to it. So we were very strict on our timelines. We managed the installer RFP process. We limited the communities and how much they could actually communicate with media. And what we've done over time, what we've learned is that the more we can hand over to the communities to run the program, the more engaged they are, and the more creativity they'll have to drive their campaign in their community, and will be more successful. And as I noted before, we've had a lot of success engaging with our other state agencies, as I said, with Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York. So this has been very successful, and we look forward to moving forward. We are slowly kind of taking ourselves out of it and becoming more of a resource now than we were in the past, more so than just driving the program as we did in the past. With that, I will pass it on.
So thanks. This is Rick Menard in New Hampshire, and I will just make 3 quick points. I'm just as enthusiastic about all this stuff as my predecessors here, but I'll be much briefer. In New Hampshire, we did do a residential rooftop solar guide that looked at a lot of the issues that locales face. And because local control is so strong in New Hampshire, there's a lot of variation about permits, costs, etc. By having it all in one place in writing, we're finding that's helping to smooth out some of the peaks. In other words, those communities that had the highest permitting soft costs are figuring out that they've got to come in line, and that seems to be very helpful. And although it's been almost 2 years since we published our report, people are still reading it. This graph shows the number of downloads from our website for each of the 4 publications. The top line in blue is the main document, and we're still seeing 50, 75 people a month downloading that. So we see it as a real value out there in the community. And of course, we'll take full credit for the decline in the cost of solar. This shows the green bars from 2009 to 2016, the cost per installed kilowatt falling by half, from $7,000 a kilowatt to about $3,500. That's what a dramatic change in the economics of PV. The blue line is the installed kilowatts in each of those years, essentially doubling between 2011 and 2015, doubling every year. And there should be a scale on the right. It's exactly the same figures as on the left, but without the dollar sign. So in 2015, installed 7,000 kilowatts in residential solar, dropping substantially if you annualize the first 8 months of 2016. We think that's just an aberration in how the data are being collected. But it's been very helpful, this process. Collaborating with the other states and collaborating across New Hampshire has been really helpful in making PV less mysterious and more just something you do. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Sean Selleck. I am a project manager with the Rhode Island Office of Digital Excellence. One of my projects is a statewide e-permitting initiative that has been thankfully supported by the Snapshot grant funding. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background about our project, how the Snapshot grant has supported the project, and what our plans are going forward. So we launched this initiative actually in 2012. The idea for a statewide permitting system was proposed, and we were able to get funding in 2013 and 2014 in order to release an RFP. We selected a vendor and launched the project in 2015, and we started going live this year over the summer. And we actually just started recently adding staff too, so there's a big plan for the ramp up. We launched in June 2016, the state of Rhode Island, 2 different state departments, the state fire marshal and the state building commission. So everything related to any project that the state of Rhode Island is building goes through our own permitting process, and that is all online. We don't accept any more paper applications for fire or building plan review or for the permitting related to those construction projects on any state-owned land or any state properties. And then we started launching municipalities. We have launched 2 municipalities so far, and we have a rollout schedule planned for the coming years. So we did have the advantage of having the state be the leader on this project, and we had funding that defrayed the implementation costs, so none of the municipalities had to bear that burden. However, we are asking them to cover support and maintenance costs in future years. So we launched, we also would like to support the idea that there is some leader. It doesn't have to be the state. It could be municipalities that would lead a type of initiative like this. We think one of the most innovative things about this project is not that it's just bringing things online, but it's a new approach to how technology is implemented across the state. We're having a unified platform, and we're taking advantage of economies of scale. We are planning for the rest of the year. We want to include Providence, Rhode Island, the largest city in the state and the capital, as well as 2 additional municipalities. And the DOE funding really supported Providence, and some of the other municipalities that we're bringing on board. We hope to have 10 municipalities launched by next spring, and even though Rhode Island is the smallest state in the country, we do hope to have over half of the state launched by the end of 2017. So I just wanted to highlight some of the most important pieces of functionality that we are really happy to have introduced with this system. Of course, it's a modern software. It allows the elimination of repetitive data entry, such as your name, address, phone number that you have to enter on every single paper permit application form today. Also, anything related to the location of the permit, where the work is being done, the address, the parcel ID, the number of square feet, anything that is held by the tax assessor's database, we've imported all of that into our e-permitting system. So we've eliminated those two things. But the thing that we're most proud of and that took the most work and will probably facilitate the application for what we hope to one day have as a solar permit, a strictly solar permit that would be a streamlined process for the installation of panels and other aspects of solar, is validation of credentials. We have worked with 4 different state agencies to import all of the name, address, license number, and expiration date of all the licenses for the electricians and many other professionals that are licensed by the state, so that a burden is reduced on or eliminated for officials to have to validate that information, and also it's eliminated for home and business owners that would normally have to go to one of these 4 different agency websites to make sure that the professional that is working on their home is licensed and insured. So those are the main highlights, and we really hope that this will reduce barriers to solar in Rhode Island, and we're really grateful for the support from DOE.
Okay. So this is Andy Perchlik with the Clean Energy Development Fund up in Vermont. I don't have slides, so you just got to imagine a beautiful Vermont scenery. I'm going to talk about our community solar interest rate buy-down program that we did. The program goals were threefold. One mainly was to focus on trying to get access to solar for low-income Vermonters, and particularly those ones that didn't have property or didn't have access to solar. They might live in apartments or low-income housing, and they might be folks that move around a little more often. So here in Vermont, we allow group net metering and allow folks to take their net metering credits with them if they move to another location within the utility service territory. And we also wanted to allow people to take advantage of that private letter ruling that Nate had talked about that would allow them to use the federal tax credit even though they weren't installing solar on their homes. We have a community solar developer that was kind of advertising that people could buy into the system and still get the tax credit even though the system wasn't on their house. So we did an RFP, got a financial institution to be a partner. They did the loans. We just bought down the interest rate. And at first we were going to just buy down the interest rate a certain percentage point. So if we were going to buy it down 2 or 3 percentage points, or depending on the income, even more. But that was difficult for both the solar developers and the financial institution to advertise because they couldn't give the potential customers just a rate. They had to ask them what their income was and go through a process. So we changed the program after we started so we could advertise specific rates. And those rates based on income are your relationship to the highest family medium income in Vermont. It's like if you were over 120% of that number, it was 3.9%. If you're 100%, 1.9%, and if you're under 80 or under, you got a 0% financing for 5 years, or different rates if it was 10 years. We had some problems getting the program started, so it turned out to be more of a pilot program because we only got 20 loans before we kind of ran out of time. But we did have some success with the program. The financial institution was excited about it, really wish we could have continued. We will continue the program under different funding in the future because of the success that we did have. One thing that the credit union that we were working with did is they created a financial calculator to help people kind of understand the economics of solar. And they found that a lot of people were using that and were interested. We also, another thing we tried at the end but didn't give any takers for is also doing this through commercial loans. And they found a lot of the commercial customers were using the calculator in particular, but it needed a longer time to close the loan and think about it. And we just didn't have enough time in the program to do that, but we are looking to do that in the future. So just to in conclusion, give you some of the data points. As I said, there's only 20 loans. 12 of those were in the lowest tier, the under 80%, which we were glad to see. Overall, it's just over 92 kilowatts installed. The average system was just over 4.6 kilowatts per system. The smallest was 2.6. The largest was 6.8 kilowatts. The average, the total loan amount was $338,000. And the average cost of these systems, the average per watt cost was $3.66, which is a little higher than we would think. And we think that the costs were even a little higher because some of these loans were small, where we don't think they were borrowing the full amount for the loan, like they paid some out of their own pocket. So we're interested to look more into what the prices are for these community solar programs are, because the conventional wisdom is that community solar is cheaper and should be cheaper, but maybe for other market reasons they're pricing them a little higher. We're not sure. So that's all I was going to say today in my little presentation, and happy to take questions at the end at the Q&A time. Thanks. Back to you, Nate.
We are all very grateful to the U.S. Department of Energy for providing Sunshot funding, which has made much of this work possible. And I'm sure there will be more to report on in the future as these states continue to improve their solar programs. So thanks for joining us. We will continue to have other webinars in the future. And in fact, on November 17th, we're going to be having a webinar on solar information for consumers. What sorts of information can and should states provide? So thank you very much.